The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the wooden ranch gate, and Delilah Winters stepped down into the dust of Calistoga, California, with her worn carpetbag in one hand and a determination in her heart that had carried her across 2,000 miles. The September heat of 1878 pressed against her travel-stained dress, but she stood straighter despite the exhaustion that threatened to buckle her knees. She had nothing left in this world except the promise of work from a distant cousin who managed the largest cattle ranch in Napa County. And even that promise had been made 3 years ago in a letter that might as well have been ancient history now. The ranch spread before her like a painting of everything the West was supposed to be. Rolling hills stretched toward mountains in the distance, golden grass rippled in the afternoon breeze, and cattle dotted the landscape like dark stars against the earth. The main house stood 2 stories tall, whitewashed and proud, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Barns and outbuildings scattered around the property spoke of prosperity and hard work in equal measure. Delilah walked through the gate, her boots raising small clouds of dust with each step. She had barely made it halfway to the house when a man emerged from the nearest barn, leading a chestnut mare by the reins. He was tall and lean, the kind of build that came from years of physical labor rather than any natural advantage. His dark hair needed a trim, curling slightly at the collar of his worn shirt, and his face carried the permanent tan of someone who lived their life under the sun. He couldn't have been much older than her own 23 years, perhaps 26 or 27 at most. He stopped when he saw her, his gray eyes taking in her appearance with an expression that held neither judgment nor pity, just a quiet assessment. She appreciated that more than he could know. "Can I help you?" he called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance between them. Delilah cleared her throat, suddenly aware of how she must look after days of travel. "I'm looking for Margaret Winters. She's my cousin. She wrote to me about work here." The man tied the mare to a post and walked toward her, his gait easy and confident. Up close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind that came from squinting against the sun and from smiling, though he wasn't smiling now. He wasn't frowning either, just studying her with that same neutral, measuring look. "Mrs. Winters passed away last winter," he said, and his voice held genuine sadness. "Fever took her quick. I'm sorry." The words hit Delilah like a physical blow. Her last hope, the thin thread she'd been clinging to for the past month of travel, snapped cleanly in two. She felt the earth tilt beneath her feet, felt the hot sting of tears threatening behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried enough over the past year. She had cried when her parents died in the fire. She had cried when she lost their farm to the bank. She had cried when the man she thought she would marry chose a woman with a dowry instead. She was done crying. "I see," she managed to say, her voice surprisingly steady. "Thank you for telling me." She turned to go, though she had no idea where she would go. The stagecoach had already departed. The small town of Calistoga was a mile back down the road, and she had exactly $7.32 to her name. "Wait," the man said, and something in his tone made her pause. "What kind of work were you expecting?" Delilah turned back to face him. "Anything. Everything. I can cook, clean, mend, tend animals. I grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania. I know how to work." He tilted his head slightly, considering. "You came all this way on a 3-year-old promise." "I came because I had nowhere else to go," she said, and the honesty of it felt like both a weakness and a strength. "I arrived here with nothing but hope." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes that might have been sympathy or might have been recognition. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once, as if coming to a decision. "That's all I started with too," he said. 5 years ago, I rode onto this ranch with a horse I'd won in a card game and the clothes on my back. Mrs. Winters gave me a chance to prove myself. He extended his hand. Xander Russell, I'm the foreman here now. Delilah shook his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. Delilah Winters. The ranch is still operating, Xander said. Mrs. Winters' husband, Thomas, owns it, but he's up in San Francisco most of the time dealing with business interests. He left me in charge of the day-to-day operations. We could use help in the house. The men and I have been trying to manage the cooking and cleaning ourselves, and let's just say we're better with cattle than we are with a stove. Hope flared in Delilah's chest, bright and almost painful. You're offering me work, room, board, and $40 a month, Xander said. The work's hard, and the hours are long. We've got 12 hands here during the busy season, and they all need feeding 3 times a day. The house needs proper maintaining, and there's always mending to be done. If you're willing to put in the effort, you've got a place here. I'm willing, Delilah said immediately. I'll work harder than anyone you've ever hired. I promise you that. I believe you, Xander said, and the simple faith in those words made her throat tighten. Come on, I'll show you to the house and introduce you to the men. We eat dinner at 6, so you'll have a few hours to get settled before you need to worry about cooking. He picked up her carpet bag before she could protest, carrying it as if it weighed nothing, and led her toward the main house. As they walked, he pointed out the various buildings. The bunkhouse where the hands slept, the main barn where they kept the horses, the cattle barns, the smithy, the smokehouse, and the various storage sheds. We run about 2,000 head of cattle, he explained. Spring and fall are the busiest times, with calving and then the drive to market. Summer's for maintaining the property and making sure we've got enough feed stored for winter. Winter's the quietest, but there's still plenty to do. The inside of the main house was exactly what Delilah expected from a household of men trying to manage on their own. The furniture was good quality but dusty. Dishes were stacked haphazardly in the kitchen. The floors needed sweeping, and she could see cobwebs in the corners of the ceiling. But the bones of the place were solid and beautiful, with large windows that let in plenty of light and a kitchen that was spacious and well-equipped. Your room's upstairs, Xander said, leading her up a wooden staircase that creaked underfoot. Mrs. Winters used this one. It's got a good view of the sunrise. He opened a door to reveal a modest bedroom with a brass bed, a wardrobe, a washstand, and a rocking chair by the window. It was more than Delilah had hoped for, more than she'd had in months. The room was dusty like the rest of the house, but it was hers, and that made all the difference. Thank you, she said, and the words felt inadequate for what she was feeling. You didn't have to do this. Xander set her carpet bag on the bed and turned to face her. In the afternoon light streaming through the window, she could see flecks of gold in his gray eyes. Like I said, Mrs. Winters gave me a chance when I needed one. Seems right to pass that along. Still, I'm grateful. He nodded, then seemed to hesitate as if he wanted to say something else. Finally, he cleared his throat. I'll leave you to get settled. There's water in the pitcher and the privy's out back. Come down whenever you're ready and I'll introduce you to the men. After he left, Delilah sat on the edge of the bed and let herself take a full breath for the first time in what felt like forever. The mattress was softer than the stagecoach bench she'd been sleeping on for the past week. The room smelled of dust and disuse, but underneath that, she caught the scent of lavender as if Mrs. Winters had kept sachets in the drawers. She would clean this room until it gleamed. She would prove to Xander Russell that his faith in her was justified. She unpacked her few belongings. 2 spare dresses, both as worn as the one she was wearing, undergarments, a hairbrush that had been her mother's, a small Bible, and a daguerreotype of her parents taken on their wedding day. She set the photograph on the small table beside the bed, then poured water from the pitcher into the basin and washed the travel dust from her face and hands. Looking at herself in the small mirror above the washstand, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Her dark hair, which she usually kept in a neat bun, had come loose during the journey, with strands escaping around her face. Her hazel eyes looked too large in her thin face, and her cheekbones stood out more prominently than they had 6 months ago. She had lost weight during her travels, existing on bread and cheese and whatever else she could afford. But she was here now, and she had work, and that meant everything would be all right. She changed into her least worn dress, a dark blue calico that had been her Sunday best back in Pennsylvania, and redid her hair, pinning it up securely. Then she went downstairs to face whatever came next. She found Xander in the kitchen, standing at the large wooden table with a ledger spread before him. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression made her think he was seeing her properly for the first time. "Better?" he asked. "Much," she said. "Show me where things are, and I'll start dinner." He showed her the pantry, which was surprisingly well stocked with flour, sugar, salt, coffee, dried beans, and various preserves. The smokehouse had bacon, ham, and dried beef. The root cellar held potatoes, onions, carrots, and apples. She had plenty to work with. "What do the men usually eat?" she asked. "Beans, bacon, bread if we've got it," Xander said. "Whatever we can throw together that will stick to our ribs. Nothing fancy." Delilah rolled up her sleeves. "I can do better than that." She spent the next 2 hours working in the kitchen, and it felt like coming home. She had always loved cooking, loved the alchemy of turning simple ingredients into something nourishing and good. She made a large pot roast with potatoes and carrots, biscuits from scratch, and an apple pie from the preserves she found in the pantry. As the sun began to lower in the sky, filling the kitchen with golden light, the smells of dinner cooking filled the house. Xander came in several times, ostensibly to check on other things, but she noticed him pausing to breathe in the aromas, a look of something like wonder on his face. "That smells incredible," he said on his 3rd visit. "It's just pot roast," Delilah said, but she felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. "It's the best thing I've smelled in months," he countered. At 6 o'clock, the men came in from the day's work, and Delilah felt a flutter of nerves as they filed into the dining room. They were a mixed group, some young, some older, all sunburned and dusty from a day's work. They stopped short when they saw her, surprise evident on every face. "Men, this is Miss Delilah Winters," Xander said. "She's Mrs. Winters's cousin, and she'll be managing the house from now on. I expect you all to treat her with respect." There was a chorus of "Yes, sir," and "Pleased to meet you, madam." And then they were sitting down. Eyeing the food on the table with expressions of awe, Delilah served the meal, hyper-aware of their eyes on her, waiting for their judgment. The first man to take a bite was an older fellow with gray in his beard. He chewed slowly, swallowed, and then looked up at her with something close to reverence. "Madam," he said solemnly, "that's the best thing I've eaten since my mother passed 15 years ago." The others quickly agreed, and soon the table was full of the sounds of men enjoying a good meal. Delilah felt the tension drain from her shoulders. She could do this. She could make a place for herself here. After dinner, she cleaned the kitchen while the men went back to the bunkhouse. She was scrubbing the last pot when Xander came in, carrying a cup of coffee. "You did well tonight," he said. "It was just food," she said, but she couldn't keep the smile from her face. "It was more than that," he said seriously. "Those men work hard and they deserve good meals. You gave them that." He sat at the kitchen table watching her work, and after a moment she realized he wanted to talk, She dried her hands and sat across from him. "Tell me about yourself," he said. "If that's not too forward." So she told him, haltingly at first and then with more ease. She told him about growing up on a small farm in Pennsylvania, about her parents who had worked hard but never seemed to get ahead. She told him about the fire that had taken them both in one terrible night, about losing the farm to debts she hadn't known existed. She told him about the man who had courted her and then abandoned her when she had nothing to offer but herself. "I spent 6 months trying to make it work in Philadelphia," she said. "I took whatever work I could find, but it was never enough. Then I remembered Margaret's letter, and I used everything I had left to buy a ticket west. I thought maybe here I could start over." Xander listened without interrupting, his gray eyes intent on her face. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I'm glad you came," he finally said. "So am I," she replied and meant it. "My story's not so different from yours," he said. "I grew up in Missouri on a farm that never quite made it. My father drank more than he worked, and when I was 16, I left. I worked my way west, taking whatever jobs I could find. I was a ranch hand, a miner for a while, even a buffalo hunter before the herds disappeared. I drifted for years, never finding a place that felt like home." He paused, staring into his coffee cup. "Then I ended up here, Mrs. Winters took one look at me and said I seemed like a young man who was tired of running. She was right. I've been here 5 years now, and I can't imagine being anywhere else." "You built something here," Delilah said. "The men respect you. That's not easy to earn." "I worked for it," he said simply. "Same as you'll do." They talked until late, the conversation flowing easily between them. Delilah learned that Xander had taught himself to read during those years of drifting, studying by firelight in whatever camp he found himself. He loved the land with a passion that was almost spiritual, spoke of the cattle and the horses with the kind of affection most men reserved for family. He was ambitious but not ruthless, dreaming of one day owning his own ranch but determined to do it the right way, through hard work and saving. Finally, Delilah realized how late it had grown and stood to go to bed. Xander stood as well, and for a moment they faced each other in the lamplight. "Thank you again," she said, "for giving me this chance." "Thank you for taking it," he replied. "I have a feeling you're going to be good for this place." "I hope so," she said. As she climbed the stairs to her room, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, the possibility of happiness. It was a fragile thing, easily broken, but it was there, and she cradled it close. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both foreign and familiar. Delilah woke before dawn to start breakfast for the men. Eggs when they had them, bacon, biscuits, strong coffee that could wake the dead. She cooked enough to fuel men who would spend the next 12 hours working under the California sun. After breakfast, she cleaned the house, room by room, scrubbing away months of neglect. She mended clothes, darned socks, sewed patches on worn knees and elbows. At midday, she prepared a substantial lunch and then dinner in the evening, trying to vary the meals so the men wouldn't get bored. The work was exhausting, but it was honest work, and she had a place to sleep and food to eat. That was more than she'd had in months. Xander was a constant presence, though never an intrusive one. He would come in for coffee in the morning, discussing the day's plans with her as if her opinion mattered. He often helped with the dishes after dinner, claiming it was the least he could do since she'd cooked. They fell into an easy companionship that surprised Delilah with its naturalness. She had known him less than 2 weeks, but already she found herself looking for him throughout the day, listening for his step on the porch, feeling a small lift in her spirits when he appeared. One evening, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Xander found her on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of gold and purple. She had finished the dinner dishes and stepped outside for a moment of peace before bed. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, settling onto the porch railing beside where she stood. "I never get tired of looking at it," she admitted. "In Philadelphia, I couldn't see the sky properly. Too many buildings. I didn't realize how much I missed open spaces until I came here." "This land gets in your blood," Xander said. "My first year here, I thought about leaving a dozen times. It was hard work and I was used to drifting. But something kept me here. Maybe it was the way the sunrise looks over those mountains, or the sound of the wind through the grass, or just the feeling that I was part of something bigger than myself." "I think I understand that," Delilah said softly. He turned to look at her, and in the fading light his expression was hard to read. "Are you settling in all right? Is the work too much?" "The work is exactly what I need," she said honestly. "It keeps me from thinking too much." "About what happened back east," she nodded. "I spent so long trying to hold on to things that were already gone. My parents, the farm, my old life. Coming here, starting fresh, it's helped me realize that maybe losing everything was the only way I could find something better." "Is this better?" he asked, and there was something vulnerable in the question. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I'm happier here than I've been in years." His smile transformed his face, erasing the weariness and revealing something boyish and warm. "Good, I'm glad." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to emerge. Delilah found herself acutely aware of his presence beside her, of the warmth radiating from his body in the cooling evening air, of the way his hands rested loosely on the railing, strong and capable. "Delilah," he said, and something in his tone made her turn to face him. "I want you to know that you're more than just the housekeeper here. You're part of this ranch now. If you need anything or if anyone gives you trouble, you come to me." All right," she said, touched by the protectiveness in his voice. "I mean it," he said. "You're under my protection." "Thank you, Xander." He held her gaze for a moment longer, then nodded and pushed off from the railing. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we're moving the herd to the south pasture, so we'll need a big breakfast." "I'll make sure you have it," she promised. As October arrived, the work on the ranch intensified. The cattle needed to be moved to their winter grazing lands, fences needed to be repaired before the rains came, and there were 100 other tasks that required attention. The men worked from dawn until well after dark, and Delilah found herself working equally long hours to keep them fed and cared for. One afternoon, she was in the root cellar, counting supplies and making a list of what they would need to order from town, when she heard raised voices from outside. She climbed the stairs and emerged to find Xander in a heated discussion with a man she'd never seen before. The stranger was well dressed in a suit that seemed wildly out of place on a working ranch, and he was red-faced with anger. "You're telling me no?" the man was saying, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Thornton," Xander said, his voice calm but firm. "And I'm telling you that those water rights aren't for sale. Mr. Winters made that clear before he left for San Francisco." "Winters isn't here," Thornton snapped. "And those rights are valuable. I'm prepared to offer a fair price." "They're not for sale at any price," Xander repeated. "This ranch needs that water access." Thornton's eyes, small and mean in his florid face, flicked to Delilah. "And who's this?" "The new housekeeper." "Pretty thing. Tell me, Russell, are her services included in your compensation package?" Delilah felt the blood drain from her face at the crude implication. Before she could respond, Xander moved, stepping between her and Thornton with a fluid grace that spoke of controlled fury. "You need to leave," Xander said, and his voice had gone dangerously quiet. "Now." I'm not done discussing business, Thornton said, but he took a step back. Yes, you are, Xander said. You insulted a lady under my protection. If you're still on this property in 5 minutes, I'll have the men escort you off. Thornton's face grew even redder, but he could apparently sense that he'd crossed a line. Winters will hear about this, he blustered. I'll write to him myself, Xander said. Good day, Mr. Thornton. They watched as Thornton mounted his horse and rode away, his back rigid with anger. Only when he was out of sight did Xander turn to Delilah. Are you all right? He asked, his gray eyes searching her face. I'm fine, she said, though her hands were shaking slightly. Who was that? Charles Thornton. He owns the ranch to the north. He's been trying to expand his water rights for years, and he's not particular about how he does it. I should have warned you about him. His jaw clenched. I'm sorry he spoke to you that way. It's not your fault, Delilah said, but thank you for standing up for me. Always, he said simply, and the conviction in that single word made her heart skip. That night after dinner, Xander asked if she would take a walk with him. They strolled through the ranch in the gathering dusk, their footsteps crunching on the dirt path. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of grass and cattle and the distant promise of rain. I've been thinking, Xander said as they walked, about what Thornton said today. About you being here and what people might say. Delilah's stomach dropped. Was he going to ask her to leave? Had she fooled herself into thinking she had a place here? Your reputation matters, he continued. I don't want anyone to think poorly of you because you're living in the same house as me. Maybe I should move to the bunkhouse, give you the house to yourself. No, Delilah said quickly, then blushed at her own vehemence. I mean, that doesn't seem necessary. The house is big enough that we're hardly in each other's way, and besides, you're the foreman. You should have your own space, not be crammed in with the hands. I don't want your name dragged through the mud because of me, he said quietly. My name has already been through worse, she said. Back in Philadelphia, people knew that Henry left me when I had nothing. They pitied me, which was worse than any insult. Here, I'm just Delilah. I'm the woman who cooks and keeps house. That's all that matters. He stopped walking and turned to face her. The last light of day caught in his hair, turning it bronze at the edges. You're more than that, he said. At least you are to me. Her breath caught in her throat. Xander. I'm not saying this right, he said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I'm not good with words. But I want you to know that I see you, Delilah. Not just as someone who works here, but as you. And what I see is someone brave and strong and kind. Someone who's been through hell and came out the other side still believing in hope. You barely know me, she whispered, though her heart was pounding. I know enough, he said. I know that you sing while you're cooking when you think no one can hear. I know that you slip extra food to the youngest ranch hand because you noticed he's always hungry. I know that you cry sometimes at night, but in the morning, you get up and face the day anyway. I know that you're the best thing that's happened to this ranch, and to me, in longer than I can remember. Delilah felt tears spring to her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, he said gently. I just wanted you to know, no expectations, no pressure, just the truth. But she found that she did have something to say. You're the best thing that's happened to me too. When I stepped off that stagecoach, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd used up all my chances. And then you said that you'd started with nothing but hope too, and I felt like maybe I'd found someone who understood. Someone who wouldn't judge me for my failures. You haven't failed, he said fiercely. You've survived. That takes more courage than most people ever have to show. They stood there in the twilight, the air between them charged with possibilities. Delilah wondered if he would kiss her, wondered if she wanted him to. The answer, she realized, was yes. She wanted him to kiss her very much, but he didn't. Instead, he offered her his arm, and they walked back to the house in a silence that was full of words neither of them quite dared to speak. The weeks that followed were sweet torture. Delilah found herself constantly aware of Xander's presence, of every look and touch and smile. They worked together with an ease that felt both natural and momentous, as if they were building something important in the everyday routines of ranch life. He would come in from working with the cattle, dusty and tired, and his face would light up when he saw her. She would pour him coffee and their fingers would brush, and the simple contact would send electricity through her whole body. The men noticed, of course. She would catch them grinning at each other when Xander lingered over dinner, or when she made his favorite pie without being asked. But their teasing was good-natured, and she sensed that they approved. Xander was well-liked, and they seemed to think he deserved happiness. In early November, Mr. Winters returned from San Francisco for a brief visit. He was a portly man in his 60s with shrewd eyes and a kind manner. He inspected the ranch thoroughly, reviewing the accounts with Xander, checking the condition of the herds and the property. On his second evening there, he sat at the dinner table after the other men had left and looked between Xander and Delilah with a knowing expression. "The ranch is in excellent condition," he said. "Better than when I left. You've done good work, Russell." "Thank you, sir," Xander said. "And Miss Winters," he continued, turning to Delilah. "The house hasn't been this well kept since my wife was alive. The men tell me you've been taking excellent care of them." "I do my best, sir," Delilah said. "I can see that." He paused, pulling out his pipe and taking his time lighting it. "My wife thought highly of you, you know. She mentioned you in her letters, said you were a good girl who'd had some hard luck. She wanted to help you." He puffed on the pipe for a moment. "I'm glad Russell saw fit to honor her wishes." "I'm very grateful for the opportunity," Delilah said. "I can also see," Mr. Winters continued, his eyes twinkling, "that there's more developing here than just a business arrangement." "Am I wrong?" Delilah felt her face flame, but Xander met the older man's gaze steadily. "No, sir, you're not wrong. At least not on my part. I have feelings for Miss Winters. Honorable feelings." "Good," Mr. Winters said, "because I won't have any scandal attached to this ranch. My wife built a good reputation here, and I intend to maintain it." "I understand, sir," Xander said. "However," Mr. Winters continued, "I'm not a cruel man, and I'm not blind to the realities of human nature. You're both young and unattached. If your feelings are genuine and if you intend to pursue them properly, you have my blessing." "Thank you, sir," Xander said quietly. After Mr. Winters retired for the evening, Delilah and Xander stood in the kitchen, the air between them thick with unspoken possibilities. "He gave us his blessing," Delilah said, still processing what had just happened. "He did," Xander agreed, "which means I can do this properly." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle around hers. "Delilah Winters, I know we haven't known each other long, just a couple of months, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I'm falling in love with you. Actually, I think I've already fallen. I love the way you hum while you work, and the way you care for everyone around you, and the way you face each day with courage even when I know you're scared. I love your kindness and your strength and your hope. I want to court you properly, if you'll have me." Delilah's heart felt too big for her chest. "I want that too. I'm falling in love with you as well, Xander. Maybe I have been since the day you said that hope was all you started with too. You made me feel seen and valued when I thought I was worthless. You gave me a chance to build a new life. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being grateful just for the job and started being grateful for you." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, the gesture achingly tender. "I promise I'll do right by you. I'll never give you cause to doubt me." "I know," she said simply, because she did know. Xander Russell was the kind of man who kept his promises. He pulled her closer, slowly enough that she could have stepped back if she wanted to, but she didn't want to. She wanted to be exactly where she was. When he kissed her, it was gentle and sweet, a promise rather than a demand. His lips were warm against hers, and his hands cradled her face as if she were something precious. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he admitted. "I'm glad you finally did," she said, smiling up at him. They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, while outside the November wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of coming rain. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Delilah had experienced before. Henry, back in Pennsylvania, had courted her with pretty words and empty promises, always careful to keep their interactions proper and public. Xander courted her with actions rather than words, showing her his feelings in 100 small ways. He brought her wildflowers he'd picked during his rides. He fixed the squeaky hinge on her bedroom door that she'd mentioned in passing. He taught her to ride horseback, patient and encouraging as she learned to control the gentle mare he'd chosen for her. He shared his dreams with her, talking late into the night about his plans for his own ranch someday, asking for her opinions and actually listening to her answers. For her part, Delilah found herself opening up in ways she never had before. She told him about her childhood, about the mother who had taught her to cook, and the father who had taught her to read. She told him about her fears and her hopes, her regrets and her dreams. With Xander, she didn't have to pretend to be anything other than what she was, and that was a gift beyond measure. The ranch hands watched their courtship with approval, and several of them went out of their way to give them privacy. Delilah would be working in the kitchen and look up to find that all the men had suddenly remembered they had tasks elsewhere, leaving her and Xander alone. As December approached, bringing with it cooler weather and shorter days, Delilah realized that she had been at the ranch for 3 months. 3 months that had transformed her entire life. She was no longer the desperate, grieving woman who had stepped off the stagecoach with nothing but hope. She was happy. She was loved. She had a purpose and a place and a future that looked brighter than anything she could have imagined. One evening, as she was preparing a special dinner of roasted chicken with all the trimmings, Xander came into the kitchen earlier than usual. He was cleaned up, wearing his best shirt, and he looked nervous. "Is everything all right?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Everything's fine," he said. "Better than fine, actually. I wanted to talk to you about something." "All right," she said, feeling her own nerves flutter to life. He took a deep breath, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Delilah's heart stopped. "I know we haven't been courting long," he said. "Just over a month officially, though it feels like I've known you much longer. I know I don't have much to offer you. I'm just a ranch foreman with some money saved up and a dream that might take years to realize. But I love you, Delilah. I love you with everything I am, and I can't imagine spending my life with anyone else." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band. "Will you marry me?" Delilah couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling so hard her face hurt. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, Xander, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands shaking slightly. It fit perfectly. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a passion that made her dizzy. When they broke apart, they were both laughing and crying at the same time. "I love you," she said, the words feeling both momentous and natural. "I love you so much." "I love you too," he said. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making you happy, I promise." They decided on a Christmas wedding, which gave them 3 weeks to prepare. It would be a simple ceremony in Calistoga's small church, with the ranch hands in attendance and whatever townspeople wanted to come. Delilah wrote a letter to a friend back in Pennsylvania, inviting her to come out for the wedding, though she knew the distance and the short notice made it unlikely. Still, she wanted someone from her old life to see her happiness, to know that she had found her place. Those 3 weeks flew by in a flurry of preparations. Delilah sewed herself a new dress, ivory wool with a fitted bodice and a full skirt. It wasn't fancy, but it was new and clean and hers, and she felt beautiful in it. The ranch hands pooled their money to buy them a wedding gift, a beautifully crafted quilt that one of the men's sisters had made. Mr. Winters sent word from San Francisco that he was giving them the use of one of the smaller houses on the property, a sturdy 2-bedroom cottage that sat on a rise overlooking the valley. It would be their home, their place to start their life together. Xander spent every spare moment fixing up the cottage, painting and repairing and making it perfect. Delilah would bring him lunch and find him covered in paint or sawdust, grinning like a boy with a secret. He wouldn't let her see inside until it was finished, insisting that he wanted it to be a surprise. On Christmas Eve, 1878, Delilah Winters walked down the aisle of the small church in Calistoga, California, carrying a bouquet of winter greenery and wearing her ivory dress. The church was packed with ranch hands and townspeople and curious strangers who had heard about the wedding and wanted to see. But Delilah only had eyes for Xander, standing at the front of the church in a new suit that he'd bought special for the occasion. He looked handsome and nervous and so full of love that it took her breath away. The ceremony was simple. They exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other for all their days. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Xander kissed her with a tenderness that made her forget there was anyone else in the room. The reception was held in the ranch's dining hall, with food and dancing and celebration that lasted well into the night. The ranch hands got tipsy on whiskey and told embarrassing stories about Xander's first days on the ranch, how he'd been thrown by a horse and landed in a water trough, how he'd once tried to rope a steer and ended up roping himself instead. Xander bore the teasing good-naturedly, his arm around Delilah's waist, his eyes never leaving her face for long. As the party wound down, Xander finally took Delilah to see the cottage. They walked through the cold December night, their breath misting in the air, and when he opened the door and carried her over the threshold, she gasped in delight. The cottage was perfect. The main room had a fireplace with a fire already burning, casting warm light over comfortable furniture and cheerful curtains. The kitchen was small but well-equipped. Upstairs, he'd created a bedroom that was cozy and inviting, with a large bed covered in the quilt the ranch hands had given them. "Do you like it?" he asked, suddenly uncertain. "I love it," she said, tears springing to her eyes again. "It's perfect. You're perfect." "I'm far from perfect," he said, pulling her close. "But I promise I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you deserve." "You already are," she said, and kissed him. That night they made love for the first time, gentle and passionate and full of discovery. Xander was patient and tender, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, talking quietly about their future. They dreamed of children someday, of building Xander's ranch, of growing old together. Everything seemed possible in that moment. Everything seemed within reach. The first months of their marriage were a period of adjustment and joy. Delilah continued to manage the main house and cook for the ranch hands, but now she had her own home to return to each evening, her own husband to care for. They settled into a comfortable rhythm, working hard during the day and coming together at night, sharing meals and conversation and love. In the spring, Delilah realized she was pregnant. She told Xander one evening after dinner, watching nervously for his reaction. For a moment, he just stared at her, and then his face broke into the biggest smile she'd ever seen. He whooped with joy and picked her up, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. "We're having a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We're going to be parents." "Are you happy?" she asked, though she could see the answer on his face. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it," he said. "You've given me everything, Delilah. A home, a purpose, and now a child. I'm the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy was easy, and Delilah continued working for most of it, only slowing down in the final months when her belly grew too large to comfortably manage all her tasks. The ranch hands were protective and helpful, taking over the heavier work without being asked. Xander fussed over her constantly, making sure she was eating enough and resting enough and not overdoing it. In early November of 1879, almost exactly a year after Xander had proposed, Delilah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him James Thomas, after both his grandfathers. He had Xander's gray eyes and Delilah's dark hair, and from the moment he was born, he had both of them wrapped around his tiny fingers. Xander was a devoted father, coming home whenever he could to hold his son, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with James when he was fussy in the night. Watching him with their child, Delilah fell even more deeply in love with her husband. As James grew from an infant to a toddler, life on the ranch continued its steady rhythm. Xander was saving every penny he could, still dreaming of his own ranch. Mr. Winters, now in his late 60s, had begun to talk about retiring and had offered to sell Xander a portion of the land at a fair price. It would take a few more years of saving, but it was within reach. When James was 2, Delilah found herself pregnant again. This time, they had a daughter whom they named Margaret Sarah, after Delilah's cousin and Xander's mother. She was a tiny thing with a fierce cry and her father's stubborn determination. James adored his baby sister, insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to feedings. The years passed in a blur of work and love and growth. The children thrived, running wild on the ranch, learning to ride almost as soon as they could walk. James was quiet and thoughtful like his mother, while Margaret was bold and adventurous like her father. Xander finally saved enough to buy 300 acres from Mr. Winters, a good piece of land with water access and rich grazing. They moved into a new house on their own property, bigger and nicer than the cottage, built by Xander and the ranch hands working together. By 1885, 7 years after Delilah had stepped off that stagecoach, the Russell Ranch was a modest but thriving operation. They ran 500 head of cattle and employed 4 hands. It wasn't as large as Mr. Winters's spread, but it was theirs, built with their own sweat and determination. Delilah still did most of the cooking and household management, but now she had help from a local woman who came in a few days a week. She also kept chickens and a large garden, putting up preserves and pickles for the winter months. One evening in late summer, Delilah stood on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the hills that she now thought of as home. The children were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. Xander came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How far we've come," she said. 7 years ago, I arrived here with nothing but hope. I was so scared, Xander, I thought my life was over. And now?" He asked softly. "And now I have everything I ever wanted and things I didn't even know to hope for. You, the children, this place. I'm so happy I can hardly believe it sometimes." "I'm the one who got lucky," he said. "That day you stepped off the stagecoach, I thought you were just another person who needed help. I had no idea you were going to change my entire life. We changed each other's lives, she said, turning in his arms to face him. We built this together. He kissed her, slow and sweet, and she could feel the love in it, deeper and stronger than ever. The years had only intensified their connection, turning the initial spark of attraction into a steady, burning flame that she knew would never go out. "Mama, Papa, come see." Margaret's voice called from the yard. They went to see what excitement their daughter had found, hands clasped together, their children running to meet them. As they stood there in the golden light of the setting sun, surrounded by everything they had built, Delilah sent up a silent prayer of thanksgiving. She had arrived at the ranch with nothing but hope, and hope had given her everything. The seasons continued their endless cycle, and the Russell family grew with them. In 1887, Delilah gave birth to their third child, another son they named Samuel. He was a happy baby who rarely cried, content to watch the world with wide, curious eyes. James, now 8 years old, took his role as big brother seriously, helping to care for the younger children and learning the ranch work from his father. Margaret, at 5, was already showing signs of being a talented horsewoman, fearless in a way that both thrilled and terrified her parents. The ranch prospered under Xander's careful management. He had a gift for raising cattle, an instinct for which animals to breed and which to sell. Their herd grew, and with it, their reputation. Buyers from San Francisco began seeking out Russell cattle specifically, knowing they were well cared for and healthy. The money that came in was immediately reinvested. More land, better breeding stock, improvements to the barns and fences. Delilah found her role on the ranch evolving as well. She still managed the household, but she also became involved in the business side of things, keeping the books and managing the ranch's finances. She discovered that she had a head for numbers, a talent she'd never had the chance to develop back in Pennsylvania. Xander relied on her judgment, and they made decisions together, equal partners in every way. In 1889, when Samuel was 2, another opportunity came their way. The ranch adjacent to theirs came up for sale when its owner passed away. It was a smaller property, about 200 acres, but it would give them access to a year-round creek and some of the best grazing land in the valley. The problem was the price. Even with their savings, they were $50 short. Delilah and Xander discussed it late into the night, weighing the risks and benefits. It was Delilah who finally suggested they ask Mr. Winters for a loan. The older man had become like family over the years, spending holidays with them and doting on their children like a grandfather. Mr. Winters didn't hesitate. He loaned them the money interest-free, waving away Xander's insistence on paying interest. "You've been like a son to me," he said. "Margaret would have wanted me to help you. Besides, you'll pay me back. I know you're good for it." They paid him back within 2 years, living frugally and putting every spare dollar toward the debt. It meant lean times, meant going without luxuries and making do with what they had. But they never felt poor, because they had each other and their children and their dream growing into reality all around them. By 1892, the Russell Ranch had grown to over 1,000 acres. They employed 8 full-time hands and took on additional workers during calving season and the fall roundup. The house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family. In 1891, Delilah had given birth to twin girls, Elizabeth and Emma. The twins were mirror images of each other, with their mother's hazel eyes and their father's gray eyes respectively. And they had a bond that seemed almost mystical, often seeming to communicate without words. James was now 13, tall and lanky, with his father's build and his mother's thoughtful nature. He had become indispensable to the ranch operations, able to do the work of a full-grown man. He was particularly good with horses, showing a patience and understanding that reminded Xander of his younger self. Margaret, at 10, was a force of nature, still the most fearless rider on the ranch, and she had inherited her mother's head for business, already helping with the bookkeeping. Samuel, at 5, was the family's peacemaker, the one who could diffuse any argument with his sunny disposition and infectious laugh. One spring evening in 1893, the family gathered around the dinner table in their expanded dining room. It was a nightly ritual they all cherished, this time together at the end of a long day. The twins, now 2 years old, sat in their high chairs, making more of a mess than actually eating, but no one minded. Delilah looked around the table at her family, at the faces she loved more than anything in the world, and felt her heart swell with gratitude. "I have an announcement," Xander said, his eyes twinkling with barely suppressed excitement. "I got a letter from the Territorial Livestock Association today. They want me to speak at their annual meeting about our breeding program." "Xander, that's wonderful," Delilah exclaimed. "They're recognizing all your hard work." "Our hard work," he corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "Does this mean we're important now, Papa?" Margaret asked, grinning. "It means our cattle are good and people are starting to notice," Xander said. "But let's not get too proud. We've still got a lot of work ahead of us." "Always more work," James said, but he was smiling. He loved the ranch as much as his father did. After dinner, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Delilah and Xander sat on their porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. It had become their habit over the years, this quiet time together at the end of each day. 15 years, Delilah said softly. 15 years since I stepped off that stagecoach, terrified and alone. Best day of my life, Xander said, taking her hand. Well, second best. Marrying you was the best, she laughed. I think the days our children were born might compete for that honor. All right, top 10 then, he amended. The point is, I thank God every day that you came here, Delilah. You've given me a life I never dreamed possible. We gave each other that life, she said. I was nothing when I arrived. You made me believe I could be something more. You were always something more, he said seriously. I just helped you see it. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Delilah spoke again. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Margaret hadn't written to me? If I'd never come here? No, Xander said firmly. Because you did come here. You were supposed to come here. I believe that with everything in me. We were meant to find each other. I believe that too, she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. In 1895, they received word that Mr. Winters had passed away peacefully in his sleep in San Francisco. He had left them a substantial portion of his estate, including another 500 acres adjacent to their property. In his will, he wrote that he considered them the family he'd never had, and he wanted to ensure their prosperity. Delilah and Xander wept for the man who had given them both their starts, who had believed in them when they had nothing. They also faced hardships. In 1896, a drought hit the valley hard, and they lost a quarter of their herd. It was a devastating blow, both financially and emotionally. Xander blamed himself, though Delilah insisted there was nothing he could have done. They got through it by cutting expenses to the bone, by selling off some of their land holdings, and by the loyalty of their ranch hands, who agreed to work for reduced wages until times improved. But they survived, and when the rains finally came in 1897, they rebuilt. The children helped however they could. James, now 18, had grown into a fine young man, steady and reliable. He had started courting a girl from town, the daughter of the general store owner, and Delilah could see in her son's eyes the same look Xander had once given her. Margaret, at 15, was being courted by the son of a neighboring rancher, though she was in no hurry to settle down, more interested in horses than in boys. Samuel, at 10, was developing into a talented carpenter, able to fix anything that broke on the ranch. And the twins, at 6, were starting school in town, bright and curious and full of questions about everything. In 1898, Delilah turned 43 years old. She stood in front of the mirror in their bedroom, studying her reflection. There were lines around her eyes now and threads of silver in her dark hair. Her hands were work-worn, and her figure had changed with 5 pregnancies. But when she looked at herself, she didn't see someone aged by hardship. She saw someone who had lived a full life, someone who had loved and been loved in return. Xander came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist just as he had so many times over the years. He was 48 now, his dark hair shot through with gray, his face weathered by decades under the sun. To her, he had never been more handsome. "What are you thinking?" he asked, the same question he'd asked hundreds of times over their nearly 20 years together. "I'm thinking that I'm happy," she said simply. "After everything we've been through, all the struggles and the triumphs, I'm just purely happy." "So am I," he said, kissing her temple. "Every single day with you is a gift." That fall, James married his sweetheart in the same church where Xander and Delilah had wed 20 years earlier. It was a bittersweet day for Delilah, watching her firstborn son pledge his life to another woman. But she liked her new daughter-in-law, a sensible girl named Sarah who clearly adored James. They moved into the cottage where Xander and Delilah had started their married life, and James took on more responsibility for running the ranch. In 1900, as the century turned, Delilah gave birth one final time, a surprise pregnancy at 45 years old. She had thought she was done having children, that the twins would be her last, but life had other plans. They had another son, whom they named Peter, and though Delilah found the pregnancy harder than her previous ones, the baby was healthy and strong. Margaret married the next year, and to everyone's surprise, she and her husband decided to stay on the ranch rather than starting their own. Her husband, David, fit seamlessly into the operation, and Margaret continued to manage the horses and help with the bookkeeping. Samuel showed no interest in marriage yet, content with his work and his carpentry. The twins, at 10, were inseparable as always, already showing signs of the beautiful women they would become. By 1905, the Russell Ranch was one of the most successful operations in Napa County. They ran 3,000 head of cattle on nearly 2,000 acres. The original house had been expanded twice more, growing to accommodate their large family and the frequent visitors they now entertained. Xander's reputation had grown beyond California. Ranchers from as far away as Texas sought his advice on breeding and ranch management. But for all their success, Xander and Delilah never lost sight of what was truly important. Every night they still sat on their porch, holding hands and watching the sun set over their land. They still said their prayers before bed, thanking God for their blessings. They still worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word. One evening in the summer of 1908, 30 years after Delilah had first arrived in Calistoga, the entire Russell family gathered for a celebration. James and Sarah now had 3 children of their own. Margaret and David had 2. Even Samuel had finally found a wife, a widow with a young daughter whom he'd married the previous spring. The house and yard were filled with children's laughter, with the sounds of family and love and life. As the party wound down and the stars came out, Delilah found herself alone on the porch for a moment. She looked out over the land that had become so deeply a part of her soul, thinking about everything that had happened here. She thought about the frightened, desperate woman who had stepped off that stagecoach 3 decades ago, carrying nothing but hope in her heart. She thought about all the years since then, the struggles and the triumphs, the love and the loss, the way life had unfolded in ways she never could have predicted. Xander found her there, as she'd known he would. He always found her. He settled beside her, and they sat in comfortable silence for a moment before he spoke. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, the familiar question bringing a smile to her lips. "Everything," she said. "Our whole life together, how it all started with hope." "The best foundation there is," he said, taking her hand. His palm was still calloused from hard work, though at 58, he had started to let James and Samuel handle more of the physical labor. "Hope brought you here. Hope gave us a chance at happiness. Hope in you," she said. "When you told me that you'd started with nothing but hope too, it gave me the courage to keep going, to believe that I could build something meaningful from nothing. We built it together," he said, squeezing her hand. "Every fence post, every fence board, every decision. We were a team from the start." "The best team," she agreed. She leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling the solid warmth of his body beside hers. "I love you, Xander Russell. I've loved you for 30 years, and I'll love you for 30 more if God grants us that time." "I love you too, Delilah Russell," he said, kissing the top of her head. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me. You and this family we built, this life we created. It's more than I ever dreamed possible." They sat there as the night deepened around them, holding each other, surrounded by the sounds of their family settling in for the night. In the distance, they could hear cattle lowing, the sound as familiar and comforting as a lullaby. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, bearing witness to their love. Delilah thought about that day so long ago when she had arrived with nothing but hope, when Xander had looked at her and seen not a desperate woman but a fellow traveler on life's hard road. He had given her a chance and she had taken it, and together they had built something that would last long after they were gone. Their children and grandchildren would carry on the ranch, would pass down the stories of how it all began. "You have any regrets?" Xander asked softly. "Not a single one," Delilah said without hesitation. "Every choice I made, every step I took led me here, led me to you. How could I regret any of it?" "I feel the same way," he said. "Even the hard times, the struggles, they all had purpose. They made us who we are." Inside the house, they could hear the children getting ready for bed, the twins now 18 and helping to settle the younger grandchildren. Samuel's stepdaughter was giggling at something Margaret's youngest had said. James and Sarah were on the other side of the porch, having their own quiet conversation. The house was full of love and life, exactly as Delilah had always dreamed a home should be. "Thank you," Delilah said suddenly. "For what?" Xander asked, surprised. "For seeing me that day. For giving me a chance. For loving me even when I was broken. For building this life with me. For everything." "Thank you for being brave enough to step off that stagecoach," he replied. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for loving me back. Thank you for giving me a family and a purpose, and a reason to wake up grateful every single morning." They kissed then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 3 decades of love and partnership and devotion. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling. "Come on," Xander said, standing and offering her his hand. "Let's go to bed. Tomorrow's another day and there's always work to be done." "Always," Delilah agreed, taking his hand and letting him pull her to her feet. They walked into the house together, hand in hand, just as they had for 30 years. Behind them, the California night settled over the ranch, peaceful and perfect. The cattle were safe in their pastures. The horses were settled in the barn. The children and grandchildren were under their roof. Everything was exactly as it should be. As Delilah climbed the stairs to their bedroom, she sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. She had arrived at the ranch with nothing but hope, and hope had given her everything. It had given her Xander, who had said those life-changing words. "That's all I started with, too." It had given her a purpose and a place. It had given her children and grandchildren and a legacy that would endure. But most of all, hope had given her love. The deep, abiding, world-changing love of a good man who had seen past her desperate circumstances to the woman she could become. The love that had sustained her through 30 years of marriage, through 5 pregnancies and 3 decades of hard work. The love that still made her heart skip when Xander smiled at her, that still sent warmth through her body when he touched her hand. That night, lying in bed with Xander's arm around her, Delilah thought about how much her life had changed since that September day in 1878 when she had arrived in Calistoga. She had been 23 years old, alone and afraid, with nothing to her name but $7 and a worn carpetbag. She had thought her life was over, that she had used up all her chances at happiness. How wrong she had been. Her life hadn't been over, it had been about to begin. Everything that had come before had been prologue, leading her to this place, to this man, to this life. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Xander murmured, already half asleep. "Always have, always will." Delilah closed her eyes, a smile on her lips, and let herself drift off to sleep, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She had come to the ranch with nothing but hope, and hope had brought her home. The years continued to flow by like water in the creek that ran through their property, each season bringing its own rhythms and changes. In 1910, tragedy struck when Samuel's wife passed away from pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. The entire family mourned, and Samuel was nearly broken by the loss. But he had his stepdaughter to care for, and the ranch worked to occupy his hands. And gradually, with the support of his family, he found his way back to something like peace. Peter, the youngest of the Russell children, grew into a young man who loved the land as much as his father did. At 18, he showed no interest in leaving the ranch, content to work alongside his father and brothers, learning everything he could about cattle and horses and the business of ranching. He had Xander's quiet intensity and Delilah's analytical mind, a combination that served him well. Elizabeth and Emma, the twins, had both married brothers from a neighboring ranch, causing much amusement in the family. The 4 of them were inseparable, running a joint operation that combined their father's lands. They visited often, bringing their growing families to Sunday dinners at the main house. By 1915, Xander was 65 years old, and Delilah was 60. They had been married for 37 years, and together they had built something that would last for generations. The ranch now encompassed over 2,500 acres, running 4,000 head of cattle. They employed 15 full-time hands and took on dozens more during busy seasons. The Russell name was synonymous with quality cattle throughout California and beyond. But the true measure of their success wasn't in acres or cattle or money in the bank. It was in the family that gathered around their table every Sunday, in the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their legacy forward, in the love that still bound Xander and Delilah together as tightly as it had on their wedding day. One spring evening in 1916, Delilah was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard the sound of a wagon approaching. She looked out the window to see James driving up with Sarah beside him, and a young woman in the back whom Delilah didn't recognize. The girl looked to be about 20, with a worn carpetbag clutched in her hands and an expression of hope and fear on her face that Delilah recognized all too well. Her heart began to beat faster. She wiped her hands on her apron and went out to meet them. "Mama," James said, climbing down from the wagon. "This is Miss Emily Porter. She just arrived on the stagecoach. She's looking for work." Delilah looked at the girl, at her travel-stained dress and her desperate eyes, and she saw herself 38 years ago. "What kind of work are you looking for?" she asked gently. "Anything," the girl said, her voice shaking slightly. "I can cook, clean, work with animals. I grew up on a farm in Oregon. I'm not afraid of hard work." "How did you end up here?" Delilah asked. The girl's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "My parents died. I lost our farm. I heard there was work in California, so I used everything I had to get here. I arrived with nothing but hope that I could find a place somewhere." Delilah felt her own eyes sting with tears. She glanced at James, who was watching her with a knowing expression, and then at Xander, who had emerged from the barn and was walking toward them. "That's all I started with too," Delilah said softly, and she saw understanding dawn in the girl's eyes. "Come inside. We'll find a place for you." As she led Emily toward the house, Xander caught up with them. He looked at the girl, then at Delilah, and smiled. "You're passing it on," he said quietly, so only Delilah could hear. "How could I not?" she replied. "Someone gave us a chance. It's only right to give someone else the same opportunity." That night, after Emily was settled in a room and the house was quiet, Delilah and Xander sat on their porch, watching the stars. Delilah thought about the circle of it all, about how life came around to offer the same lessons and the same opportunities in different forms. "She reminded me of myself," Delilah said. That look in her eyes, like she was holding on to hope by her fingernails. "You gave her the same gift I gave you," Xander said. "A chance. That's all anyone really needs." "I hope she finds what she's looking for here," Delilah said. "I hope she finds her own Xander Russell, someone who will see her value and help her build a life." "If she's anything like you, she will," Xander said with certainty. "Hope has a way of leading people where they're meant to be." Delilah leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. They were growing old together, just as they had always planned. His hair was completely gray now, and his movements were a bit slower than they used to be. Her own hair was more silver than dark, and her hands ached on cold mornings. But they were still together, still working side by side, still in love. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Delilah asked. "When I told you I had arrived with nothing but hope." "I said that's all I started with too," Xander replied. "I remember it clearly. It was the moment I knew you were special, that you were someone who understood what it meant to bet everything on possibility." "Those words changed my life," Delilah said. "They made me feel like I wasn't alone, like someone understood. They gave me the courage to try." "And look what you built with that courage," Xander said, gesturing at the ranch spread out before them in the moonlight. "Look what we built together." "I couldn't have done it without you," she said. "We couldn't have done it without each other," he corrected. "That's what partnership means. We each brought our strengths, our hopes, our dreams, and we wove them together into something bigger than either of us alone." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Delilah spoke again. "I want to tell Emily our story. I want her to know that arriving with nothing but hope isn't the end of the road. It's the beginning." "I think that's a good idea," Xander said. "Everyone needs to know that their circumstances don't define their future. Hope can take you anywhere if you're brave enough to follow it." Over the following weeks and months, Delilah did exactly that. She took Emily under her wing, teaching her not just the practical skills of running a household, but also the deeper lessons she had learned over her years on the ranch. She taught her that hard work had dignity, that hope was a choice you made every day, that building a life worth living required both courage and faith. Emily thrived under Delilah's guidance. She worked hard, never complaining, always willing to learn. And just as Delilah had predicted, she caught the eye of one of the younger ranch hands, a good man named Tom who treated her with respect and admiration. Within a year, they were courting, and the following spring they married in the same church where 3 generations of Russells had been wed. At the wedding, Delilah stood with Xander, watching Emily walk down the aisle toward her future. She thought about the day she had made that same walk, about all the years that had followed, about the life she and Xander had built from nothing but hope and determination. "She's going to be all right," Xander said softly. "I know," Delilah replied. "She has hope, and hope is the beginning of everything good." As the years moved on into the 1920s, Xander and Delilah gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, letting James and Peter take over more of the responsibility. They remained involved, offering advice and guidance, but they also allowed themselves to slow down, to enjoy the fruits of their decades of labor. They spent their days tending Delilah's now extensive garden, riding through the property on gentle horses, and most of all, spending time with their ever-growing family. They had grandchildren and great-grandchildren scattered across 3 counties now, all carrying forward the legacy of hard work and integrity that Xander and Delilah had established. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1928, the family threw them a celebration that brought people from all over the state. The ranch had become legendary, not just for its cattle but for the family that ran it, for the values they embodied, for the way they treated their workers and their neighbors. During the party, James stood up to make a toast. He was 53 now, his own hair graying, his own grandchildren running around the yard. 50 years ago, he said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, my mother arrived at this ranch with nothing but hope. My father saw that hope and recognized it, because it was the same thing that had brought him here years before. Together, they built something remarkable. They built this ranch, yes, but more importantly, they built a family and a legacy based on love and hard work, and the belief that anything is possible if you have hope and you're willing to fight for it. They taught us that where you start doesn't matter nearly as much as where you're determined to go. They taught us to help others the way they were helped, to pass on the gift of opportunity. They taught us what real love looks like, the kind that lasts 50 years and shows no signs of fading. Mama, Papa, thank you for everything you've given us. Thank you for showing us how to live. There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd when he finished. Delilah and Xander stood together, holding hands, overwhelmed by the love and respect flowing toward them from every direction. Later, when the party had wound down and they were alone again on their porch, Delilah turned to Xander with tears in her eyes. 50 years, she said wonderingly. We've been married for 50 years. Best 50 years of my life, Xander said. Every single day with you has been a gift. Even the hard days, she asked. Especially the hard days, he said. Those were the days that proved what we had, that showed us we could survive anything as long as we were together. Delilah thought about all those days, the thousands of mornings when they had woken up side by side, the thousands of evenings when they had sat on this porch and talked about their day. She thought about the 5 children they had raised, the ranch they had built, the life they had created from nothing but hope and love and determination. I would do it all again, she said. Every single moment, every struggle, every triumph, I would choose you again in a heartbeat. So would I, Xander said, pulling her close. In any life, in any world, I would always choose you. They kissed as the sun set over the land they loved, 2 people who had started with nothing but hope and had built everything. The years that followed were gentle ones. Xander and Delilah spent their time surrounded by family, secure in the knowledge that the ranch would continue long after they were gone. They took pleasure in simple things: morning coffee on the porch, walks through the property, Sunday dinners with 3 generations gathered around the table. Their love, far from fading with age, seemed to deepen with each passing year, becoming something both comfortable and profound. In 1932, Xander fell ill with a sickness that the doctors couldn't quite name. He grew weaker over the course of several months, though he never lost his spirit or his love of life. Delilah tended him with the same care she had given everything else in her life, sitting by his bed for hours, holding his hand, talking about their years together. One evening in late autumn, as the sun set through their bedroom window, Xander looked at Delilah with the same love he had shown her for 54 years. "I've had a good life," he said, his voice weak but clear. "Better than I ever dreamed possible. You gave me that, Delilah. You and the family we built. You gave it to me too," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Everything good in my life came from loving you." "Tell me again," he said. "Tell me about the day you arrived." So she did, holding his hand, telling him the story he had heard 100 times before. She told him about stepping off the stagecoach, about her fear and her desperate hope. She told him about the moment she first saw him, leading that chestnut mare. She told him about telling him she had arrived with nothing but hope. "And I said that's all I started with too," Xander whispered, smiling. "I knew in that moment that you were special. I knew you were meant to be part of my life." "It was the best moment of my life," Delilah said. "Everything started from there." "Everything good," Xander agreed. He was quiet for a moment, his breathing shallow. "Don't be sad for too long, my love. I've lived a full life and I'm dying happy. Take care of the family, keep telling our story. Make sure they know that hope is always enough if you're brave enough to act on it." "I will," she promised. "I'll make sure they never forget." Xander passed away that night, peacefully, with Delilah holding his hand. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by the Russells over the years. They laid him to rest on a hill overlooking the ranch, where he could watch over the land he had loved so much. Delilah grieved deeply, as was only natural after 54 years of marriage. But she also remembered Xander's words, his request that she not be sad for too long. She continued to live at the ranch, surrounded by family, taking comfort in the continuation of the life they had built together. She lived to see great-great-grandchildren born, to see the ranch continue to prosper under James and Peter's management. On quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch alone, talking to Xander as if he were still beside her. She would tell him about the day's events, about the children and grandchildren, about the changes on the ranch. And sometimes, when the wind blew just right, she could almost feel his presence beside her, could almost hear his voice saying he loved her. In 1938, at the age of 83, Delilah Winters Russell passed away peacefully in her sleep. They buried her beside Xander on the hill, reuniting them in death as they had been in life. The funeral was even larger than Xander's had been, a testament to the impact she had made on everyone who knew her. At the funeral, Emily, now a grandmother herself, stood up to speak. "Delilah Russell arrived at this ranch 60 years ago with nothing but hope," she said. "She took that hope and built a legacy that will last for generations. She taught us that it doesn't matter where you start, it matters where you're willing to go. She taught us to help others the way we've been helped. She taught us that love and hard work can overcome any obstacle. But most of all, she taught us that hope is never foolish. Hope is the beginning of everything good." I arrived at this ranch 22 years ago with the same thing Delilah had, nothing but hope. She saw herself in me, and she gave me the same chance she had been given. That's her legacy, that chain of hope and opportunity that she started and that continues to this day. We honor her by continuing it, by giving chances to those who need them, by never forgetting that we all start with hope, and hope is always enough. The Russell Ranch continued to operate for generations after Xander and Delilah passed. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren kept the land and kept the traditions. They maintained the values that had been established by two people who had started with nothing but hope and built everything. The story of Xander and Delilah became a family legend, told and retold to each new generation, a reminder that love and hope and hard work could create miracles. And on that hill where they were buried, under the California sun they had both loved so much, their legacy continued to grow. The ranch they had built from nothing but hope stood as a testament to what two people could accomplish when they believed in each other and in the possibilities of tomorrow. It stood as proof that arriving with nothing but hope wasn't the end of anything. It was, in fact, the very best beginning of all.